Hi, I'm Seán Duggan, and welcome to TheFIX, the podcast about Photoshop, Lightroom, post-processing software, and all the cool and creative things we get to do with our images after the shoot. On this episode, I'm joined by Kevin La Rue, the Vice President of Macphun Software, and we're going to be talking about a new kid on the HDR block, Macphun's new program, Aurora HDR Pro, which was developed in collaboration with Trey Ratcliff. Stay with us. Thanks for tuning in and joining me here in my corner of the internet, my corner of thisweekinphoto.com. So on this episode, we're talking HDR software with Kevin La Rue, who's the Vice President of Macphun Software. Kevin, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Hey, thanks, Sean. Glad to be here. Appreciate the invite.
You know, you're welcome, and appreciate you stopping by because Macphun has a new program out that was released, late November? I think it became available November 20th.
Yeah, it was about a week before Thanksgiving. It was on the 19th of November, so fairly recent.
All right, that's exciting. So before we get into talking about Aurora HDR Pro, let's just talk a little bit about Macphun Software. So what's the story there? How far back does that go?
Well, you know, Macphun got its start in 2008. A couple of ex-video game developers saw the iOS explosion and the launch of the iTunes store. And really started to turn some attention to building apps for mobile phones. After about 60 or 70 apps to really get their feel for it, and everything from imaging to games to puzzles to trivia type of games, the Mac App Store was right around the corner. And so they jumped on to the Mac App Store, and really the more popular of their mobile apps was in the imaging side. And so since about 2010, we've been entirely, I'd say mostly focused on the Mac desktop and delivering, super high quality image editing apps to Macs. We were some of the first photo editing apps in the Mac App Store when it launched in early 2011. And since then, you know, we've just kind of been churning these things out. We've got a whole suite of products in what we call our Creative Kit 2016. There's 6 apps that are easy to use, deliver a lot of power, you know, really across the spectrum. Our apps are known for being very easy to use. Might be part of the mobile routes that we have, but also have a ton of power under the hood for the pros and the prosumers to kind of dig into.
Yeah.
You'll see that coming up.
Well, you know, I'm very familiar with Tonality Pro, which is your Mac your black and white editing software, and right. I definitely was pretty impressed with that. And I feel it is a really good alternative for people who want to maybe sort of have a more of a one-stop shop for taking an image in and exploring different treatments in black and white. I found it really easy to use and pretty powerful and offered a lot of options. So definitely was impressed with that. Yeah, and so you and I met a couple of years ago, I guess, because Macphun sponsored a promotion where they gave away a trip to Iceland, and
we do what we can.
Yeah, the trip that you gave away just happened to be on one of my Iceland workshops that I did with Focus on Nature, and that was actually that workshop took place just about a year ago in the fall of 2014.
Oh wow! Okay.
Yeah, so that was great, and the person who won is a really cool guy, and I'm still in touch with him, and he's enthusiastic image maker.
Yeah, in fact, I would say that he is one of our most popular posters on our Facebook groups. He's still turning out some awesome images using the Macphun tools and the training and tips that I'm sure he got from you and the Focus on Nature guys.
Yeah, no, he's great. Ian Ferguson, he was a wonderful, enthusiastic person. It was great to meet him, and it was, of course, good to meet you and some of the other people at Macphun through that association. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah. Ian's an avid motorcyclist, as am I, and
Right.
so we're constantly sharing pictures of our bikes.
Cool.
Staying in touch that way.
So, one thing I wanted to talk with you about that is kind of related to the software lineup that MechFun has, and other programs that are out there in the imaging ecosystem that we all deal with, is this sort of almost a paradigm shift that's occurred over the last several years in terms of how we process our images. So my history is, it goes way back to Photoshop version 2.0. Before there was layers, this was the early 1990s. Right. I guess 94 or something was the first time I got it.
Yeah.
And so I kind of cut my teeth on learning Photoshop and scanning. This was even before digital cameras at that point, working with high-end scanners and all that. And Photoshop gradually, acquired a lot of plugins that people developed for it that were, sort of specific to creating certain types of effects. And, then Lightroom came along, and so there's Lightroom and Photoshop. But, in the past, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years maybe, it seems that there's, this definite trend towards these, more standalone imaging application suites that can function as a Photoshop or a Lightroom plugin, but that also, work as standalone apps that allow people to do a lot of imaging work, a lot of the stuff that they might have done in Photoshop previously, that allow people to do that in a standalone app. And certainly MechFun has been part of that wave.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Sean, because I've got a lot to say about it. I actually got my start in the software business working for a company called Silicon Beach Software. And the Knoll brothers brought the early versions of Photoshop before it was released to back, I want to say 88 or 89. This is before they sold it to Adobe. And they shared it with us because we had a product called Digital Darkroom. And we passed on the deal, but my graphics roots go all the way back to about 1987 on the Mac, and so I certainly remember that entire arc. And I think fast forwarding to the one other point there, Silicon Beach actually invented the modern plugin architecture that everybody's using. So way prior to way prior to Adobe implementing it in their software, we had it back in a product called SuperPaint back in, again, 1988 or 89. So fast forwarding to the future, of course, millions and millions of people have smartphones now that are wonderful image capture devices. There's many more pictures being taken, and uploaded every minute. And I think, with that huge influx of new photographers into the market, big, I hesitate to use the word, but monolithic programs like Photoshop and Lightroom, they're just overkill for most people. And so, as I mentioned, we got our start making easy to access, easy to use tools within the Mac App Store. When we formed the US office in mid 2013 here, we decided to go pro with these apps, making them plug-in compatible, putting in raw conversions, file conversions, and some more bells and whistles that the pros like, recognizing that people were going to use it wherever they use it. One of the trends that I've seen recently is the whole mobile to desktop arc. So with Apple's introduction of Photos for Mac and some really super smooth cloud syncing between the mobile phone and the Mac, Photos for Mac mimics its mobile counterpart and replaces iPhoto and Aperture. What it's missing, though, and it's got that great cloud syncing, but what it's missing is more power on the editing side. So when Apple released the spec for editing extensions and enabled developers to really start getting into that and developing their tools and modifying them to work with photos, we were available day one with El Capitan, and all four of the 4 core products in our creative kit were again available day one. So imagine, you're taking an image on your iPhone, and maybe you pinch and zoom a little bit, and maybe it's inside because a lot of it is very social, right? So
Right.
you've when you zoom in on these iPhones, you introduce naturally some noise, and you know all about noise and sensors and things like that. Well, that image, before you share it, it gets automatically synced to the cloud down into your Photos for Mac. You launch that thing, you pull down into the editing functions and the editing extensions. There's Noiseless. It's our award-winning product for noise reduction. In a couple of clicks, we've analyzed your image. We've got smartphone algorithms that we specially customized for these mobile photos, and you're in and out in a couple of seconds. And now you've got a high-quality shot out of your iPhone that's been completely noise reduced or denoised, they say.
Right. And that's
you can go
the,
on and do whatever you do with photos, share it or whatever.
Yeah. But that's through the Photos for Mac architecture there, going from the iPhone to the desktop.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And again, thinking about that desktop workflow in a standalone situation, all of our apps, including Aurora, which we'll be talking about in a few minutes, have the ability to share to photo communities and social networks built right into them. Because, we recognize people don't have a lot of time. The previous workflow was, get it done in Photoshop, resize it,
right.
Save it somewhere, and then launch Facebook or whatever and
right.
share. Now it's just one smooth process.
Well, one aspect of the the newer imaging app paradigm that I kind of refer to, that MechFun has a lot of products available for that, and of course there are other products out there as well. But one aspect that I find is really makes it very accessible and approachable for people is the use of presets in the software, to the point where when you go into the software right away, you can see a range of presets. And what I find useful about that, and this is actually sort of maybe a little bit of a surprise to me, because I kind of come from the old school Photoshop background, where you're using Photoshop to do everything. Yeah, I know it's although it's kind of funny to refer to something relatively so recent as old school, but is that those presets, I find, provide me with a lot of creative visual inspiration, because obviously there are presets that you can have in Photoshop and there are presets in Lightroom, but what's nice about them in like some of the MechFun programs is that they just appear down at the bottom or on the side of the interface, and you can see the image treated in all these different presets. So right off the bat, you're given this range, this menu of visual possibilities for, oh, well, that looks good, or that's way too much. But it kind of narrows down and maybe helps you quantify, oh, this is kind of the area where I want to take it. Let me try out some of these presets. And then, of course, you can modify the settings of those to spin off your take on that. So I find that is, it was surprising to me that I kind of keyed into that so much. And I realized that for people for whom Photoshop is this big behemoth, is what you refer to, this big giant thing that's kind of hard to learn for a lot of people, that the more simpler interface in programs such as those in the MechFun lineup really does make it a lot more accessible and approachable for people who don't need all of what Photoshop offers. Right.
Yeah, it's much. I mean, I think the nature of plugins in general has always been, and this is across all manufacturers, to get a result more quickly. In the case of the presets, there's a few points I want to make. To me, there's sort of you've hit upon a key use of them, which is creative exploration. I mean, I think of digital artists in Photoshop. They may have something in their mind, and they're going for it in Photoshop. But if they get to a point where, boy, it doesn't look the way I want it, it's so hard to sort of back out. And you might only explore one or two different looks in a Photoshop workflow. In a MechFun workflow, say with Intensifier, Tonality, or Aurora, which we'll get to, man, you can click through 20 or 30 or 40 different looks in minutes. And if a look is too strong for you, you can either choose a different preset, or every one of them has an opacity slider or an amount slider. So you can find something, let's say you're looking for a detailed look, so you hit a detail preset, but it's too much for that image. right? So just dial back on the opacity until it's exactly the way you like it. The other thing I'll point out is from a discovery standpoint of the power of the tool, every one of the presets, when you click one of them, is actually driven by a control panel on the right-hand side of the software, and that control panel, that adjustment panel, has, of course, many different functions to it, and each one of those functions are adjusted according to the setting that the preset demands. Mm-hmm. And what we've done in our more recent products is start to color code those so that you know exactly the features of the software that preset uses to generate that look. And it's a great discovery and education tool, because you can click a preset and go, wow, that's really cool. How did they do that? And then you go right over to the adjust panel and start to expand some of the controls, and all the controls that were used to make that preset are color coded so that you can modify them individually. And I think over time, when you're using the program, you become much more proficient with it, much faster, because of that aspect of the software.
Yeah, that's a great feature. I'm actually glad you mentioned that, because I think I know what you're talking about, because I was playing with Aurora, this morning and last night, and I noticed that some of the little panels, the name of the panel was like orange or something like that. Right. Is that what you're referring to? That
That's
color
exactly
coding?
what I'm referring to. And you also mentioned. Making custom presets, and a lot of people do that. It's easy to adjust the settings, kind of salt your food to taste, right? And then save off a custom preset, and that just pops into a category of the presets that are called user presets. Right. The neat thing about that is, in our creative kit, we've got batch processing built into most of the applications. So if you have a folder of images that you want to denoise in a certain way, or you want to apply a black and white effect and tonality, again, suited to your custom preset, super easy to fire up that batch processor, throw a folder of images at it, choose the custom preset, choose a size and resolution, some naming conventions, and then let the software and the computer crank them out for you.
Nice,
super fast
nice.
and easy.
Yeah. So listen, let's move on to talk about Aurora HDR. New program. There really hasn't been a new HDR specific program on the market in a little while. So tell us kind of the backstory of how that got started, how it got developed, and all that.
Sure. As actually, I'm really excited about Aurora, because the genesis of it was really a call about a year and a half ago between Curtis Simmons and Trey Ratcliff and myself, where we were just kind of gabbing. And I remember I was in a hotel in San Francisco, and of course Curtis is in Texas at the time, and Trey had just moved over to New Zealand, and we're talking about it. And I asked a casual question, well, what are you guys working on, or what are you guys doing these days? And one of the things that emerged was that they were thinking about how there hadn't been anything new on the HDR front in a while. As you know, Trey is one of the world's most renowned HDR photographers. He's got 14 million plus fans following him. He told me the other day that his images have been viewed over 115 billion times on the internet, which is just a staggering number to me. The guy's got just an encyclopedia full of HDR shooting experience and knowledge, and of course ideas. And as soon as they said they were thinking about no new advances in HDR, I kind of popped in and said, well, what could we do together? What if we built you the HDR product of your dreams? And from that moment in time, we've come all the way to November 19th, 2015, to the release of Aurora, and again, kind of part of the contribution, a significant part of the contribution that Trey provided was a very, very detailed recipe of how he makes his HDR images, and it involved a workflow that went from Lightroom to one of the other HDR tools, and then through Photoshop for some finishing. And so one of the key tenets of Aurora was a start-to-finish workflow. We wanted him to be able to open up those raw bracketed sets, merge them, tone map them, go through his entire workflow, and then be able to export them out in one program. And I think we've achieved that with Aurora.
Huh, interesting. So then all the stuff that he would have had to have done in Photoshop for the kind of the finishing touches and final tweaking and massaging, the idea is that all that can now be done in Aurora as well, right?
We've mashed it up into one bit of software, and I think that as we provided development versions and beta versions to Trey, he ran tons of images through the software, gave us an incredible treasure trove of feedback. Where from something as small as what the name of a slider should be, all the way to notes on expected results of the algorithm. So we did algorithm tweaks, and again, there was this idea that we wanted a tool that could also suit anybody. I mean, Trey's got a certain style, but this thing, if we were going to make it the new standard, needed to support everything from a very natural, realistic type of results, say for landscape photographers or whatnot, all the way to the sort of the fantasy, dreamy looks that a whole other genre of photographers like. So again, I think that I'm cautiously optimistic that we've hit the mark. Coming out of the gate again in late November, there we've already released 2 updates to the software, and I want to be clear, this wasn't to fix bugs. It was because a ton of people started looking at this thing and giving Trey feedback, giving MechFun feedback, and our engineers are like, oh yeah, we can do that, we can do that, we can do that. And so literally in less than 2 weeks, we put out a major version upgrade that shipped yesterday, that launched yesterday. It's a free update, of course, and includes some powerful new ways to work with it in the Lightroom. We've added a whole bunch of new camera raw formats, and again, some interesting little tweaks and people saying, gee, it would be nice if, and the guys put it out, and we'll continue that. I don't know if we'll continue on that every 2-week pace, but we'll continue to be super responsive to people's needs, and certainly to what the forefront of HDR photography looks like.
Right. And so before we get in and take a look at it, I just want to clarify for people listening and viewing that at the moment, this is a Mac only program, but that the possibility of a Windows version is definitely out there on the horizon.
Yeah, so MechFun has obviously been known as an Apple shop, from our roots, and we're very good at that. I mean, we know the systems and architecture very, very well. We are in some significant discussions about creating a Windows version of Aurora. Trey is certainly the biggest advocate for that, because there's a large portion of his stuck in customs audience that are on Windows, and so you will see a Windows version of Aurora sometime next year. It's not going to be overnight, but the intent is absolutely to create a Windows version. It's also not currently plugged in as an editing extension for photos. I mentioned the other products in our creative kit can be used within Photos. Aurora can't do that yet. One of the reasons was because by its very nature, HDR likes to have multiple exposures to tone map and to get the high dynamic range. The Photos editing architecture today doesn't support that. So we are working with, and this is kind of a relatively recent news, but we are working with the Apple engineers to modify those editing extensions API that they give developers to support multiple images, and of course, when that happens, we'll be ready with Aurora HDR.
Well, let's on that note, let's have a look at Aurora HDR, and why don't you take us through and show us some of the high points?
Hey, I'd be happy to. Well, Seán, it's great to have the ability to show Aurora HDR to you. When the product first loads as a standalone, you get this pretty friendly dialog box that lets you load images or load sample images. Because a lot of people may be new to HDR, we wanted to include some sample images so that they could get started right away with a multiple exposure kind of scenario. When you're shooting HDR, you want to try to be on a tripod. You want a very stable platform. So if you're doing it handheld, we do have alignment functions. We do have ghost reduction. Ghosts are things in between exposures that are moving. And so with HDR software, you want to limit that movement as much as possible. This particular shot doesn't have a lot of movement in it. I won't get into chromatic aberration. It's fringing on high contrast edges. Again, this particular image doesn't have a lot going on there, so we'll just roll right into the image. As you can see, there's a little progress indicator showing what the software's doing. Now, this same merging process, will happen in Photoshop, Lightroom, and Aperture when running Aurora as a plugin. So we do work as both standalone and plugin. So let me go ahead and I'm going to close this preset panel that we were talking about earlier and just kind of walk through the interface fairly quickly with this particular sample images. As you can see in the information bar here, we've got zoom level, we've got the settings coming from the EXIF data in your camera. We also show you what the exposure values of the 3 images that were pulled in on. So that's pretty useful information. We've got simple open and sharing functions in here. We've got our zoom controls across the top. We've got our comparison controls here. And then we've got cropping, moving, brush layer, and histogram. And I'll get into those as far as we get into the software. Moving down the right side of the tool, you've got a whole bunch of different, I would say, controls, features, functionality, and each one of these tools. So there's tone mapping, there's toning, there's denoising. A lot of times when you're merging HDR images together, you can get into a situation you might have some noise. There's glowing, there's graduated neutral density filters in here, which we call top and bottom lighting, vignetting. I'll go into some of these on this image, but I just wanted to let your viewers and listeners know that it's got a lot of power built into this thing under the hood. So go ahead.
Well, just a quick question to point out or a clarification. So right now we're seeing that the word structure there is orange. And so that is that feature you were referring to earlier, where that means that the current preset that is being used is using settings in that panel.
Exactly. So that's thanks for clarifying that. That's the default tone mapping that we want to provide, every photo or every exposure bracket is one that's more on the natural end of the spectrum. We want the natural photographer guys to have a great looking image right out the gate, and then you can kind of take it from there. So we found across thousands of brackets just a little bit of this function that we call HDR look. About 20, you can see it about a plus 20 is optimized just from the straight initial tone map. Again, if I go into my presets, let me just fire off a couple of presets here. Let's go into, say, Architecture Dramatic preset. And as you can see, the Architecture Dramatic preset has invoked 4 or 5 different functions. We've modified the tone curve, we modified the tone a little bit, et cetera, et cetera. So depending on the preset that you choose, it'll modify the tools and show you which ones make up that preset. Since we're on presets, you had mentioned being able to kind of scroll through a lot of different looks. We have these real-time previews. We've got a night city. We've got a warm sunset, which kind of warms up the entire image. But those are just all within the architecture category. As you can see, we've got 10 different categories here. And so we can go to a more realistic look, a dramatic look, indoor. Trey's even got some great presets here that are his own kind of unique spices. So he's got one called Angels Within that's a little bit darker. Black Truffle Salt is one of my favorites. You can see the yellow star here up in the corner. So any preset that I like can be starred. And when I go back into the preset categories, I can go to my favorites, and just those will be shown. So
very nice.
So it's a nice little shortcut, because we do have 50 or 60 presets in here. It's nice to kind of pull back to just the 5 or 6 that you use a lot. Now notice I've chosen a preset called Strong HDR Look. And if I zoom in here a little bit, let me just kind of zoom in a couple of clicks. You can see that it is indeed a very strong look to the image. This is that opacity slider. Maybe if it's a little too much, this is that opacity slider that will take away or diminish some of the settings in the preset. So,
and that's right up there at the top under the histogram in the layers section, right?
Well, I'm actually scrolling the little slider on top of the preset thumbnail down at the bottom.
Oh, I see.
But it's modifying the histogram. You can see that.
Yeah.
So here it was at 100%. You see the sky's a little crunchy, I guess.
Yeah.
And but I might really like the way the cityscape is being shown. But if I dial that down, you can see the sky smooths out a little bit. So I've maintained my Strong HDR Look preset, but I've just dialed it back a little bit.
Yeah, right.
Really easy to do. So let's come in here to the realistic side of things. Let's kind of do let's try Happy Day. This preset right here is one of our new presets that shipped yesterday. And to be honest with you, I haven't had much of a look for it. It looks a little bit soft to me. So again, this is where you can choose a preset and you can go, okay, look, I like that, but it's a little bit soft. So I'm going to dial back. You notice that the amount is in the minus side. So I might dial that more towards the plus side and get just a little bit more detail in there, and that'll suit my tastes a little bit. So just kind of working down the panel here, you notice that this particular preset has something called image radiance. Now, image radiance is that tool that gives your image a little bit more of that dreamy or fantasy look. So if I turn that off, that goes away. But if I bring it back in, of course, in the amount, it kind of gives a radiant look to all the tones in the image. Our glow tool, however, is a great way to bring just a glow around the highlights or the lights in the city. So I can come in here and I can actually add a glow to some of the lights. And so again, you're looking at a full suite of tools. We started with the preset. Now we're seasoning the image to taste. Let me show you top and bottom lighting, because this is one of my favorite tools. So what top and bottom lighting does is it allows me to adjust, I guess, the exposure level of the top part of the image and the bottom. So basically what I'm doing here is I'm darkening the sky a little bit, but I might want to brighten up the city just slightly. And then as I click the blend, you can see the lines on the screen are moving to show you how the effects are blending between top and bottom. And I can also shift the orientation. So if I want to make sure that the top is dark and the bottom is a little bit lighter, I can do that. So,
and just to clarify for people who are watching or listening, that to adjust that, you're actually moving the sliders. You're not actually dragging on the screen like you would with the gradient tool in Lightroom.
Correct. I can show you a gradient tool here. There's another way to have this affected. It actually affects the image differently. But yeah, in the case of the top and bottom lighting, we're just laying some algorithms on your image there and letting you adjust them very easily with the sliders. And then finally, I'll just for this particular image, I'll just show you some vignetting. A lot of applications have vignetting. One way that ours kind of stands out is in this idea of being able to place the center. So right now, and I'll be a little bit more dramatic here. Right now, as I do the vignette, you can see that it's mostly right around the center here. If I click place center, I can actually direct your eye more towards the Ferris wheel in this particular picture, which is in the upper left. And so and I'm going to dial that vignette back a little bit. And so it's a way, for somebody to, again, stylize their image the way they want. And in the case of the vignette, sort of direct attention to an important subject that you want them to view. So that's a little, we've kind of round tripped and I know we've kind of skipped around a little bit in the interface here, but that's where we are with even the sample image that comes with the program. Let me show you the before. And let me show you the after.
And of course, the before is we're only seeing one of the source exposures.
Exactly. I'm so glad you brought that up, because this again is another brand new feature. We had originally had it set for the before being the initial tone map image, but as of yesterday, we added the ability to compare. When you do the comparison, either before, after, or side by side, you can compare with the middle bracket of the exposure, or you can compare to the original tone map. So if I set the original tone map here, so there's the original tone map, and then we have our result. Let me do a side by side, and you can kind of see the result there. Mm-hmm. Take a couple of seconds for the software to catch up, but pretty fast. And so on the right-hand side, you have where we've landed, right, with the preset. The left-hand side is the one where the initial tone map was created. So great question there.
Cool.
Okay, so if you don't mind, I'd like to actually open up another bracket set and show you an entirely different image.
Yeah, no, by all means. Let's see something different.
Let me just take a look at this one. Okay, this is kind of a cool one. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select these 5 exposures. And again, I've just clicked on an open dialog. And when I click open, it's going to ask me to save the previous changes. Don't need to do that. And then it's again going to give me that dialog that shows me the actual exposures that the HDR image will be made from. Again, shot on tripod, really isn't anything moving in the image, so I don't need to check any of these boxes, but I could. And by the way, if you do have a ghost reduction situation where maybe you have something moving through the image, our ghost reduction, we can do it automatically, or you can choose a reference image as one of the exposures. So you can really do some nice selective ghost reduction.
So like if you had a series of images where there was waves crashing on the beach, for instance, mm-hmm. and one of the images had like a really cool looking wave, you could basically select that exposure and say, we'll use this as the reference for the ghost reduction.
That's exactly right. That's exactly cool. Right. So let's go ahead and go back to the compare with the middle bracket. And so here was the middle bracket, and here's our tone mapped version. So I mm-hmm. think just right out of the gate, you can see that we've done a good job at blending those 5 images together and giving mm-hmm. a nice, rich image. I hope that's coming across on your screen, because on my Retina Mac, it looks awesome.
No, so, it's coming across very well. Yeah,
cool.
For a lot of people, that might be all that they would need.
Well, that's a good point, and in fact, I'll use it as a segue to show you some of the export features. When you click this arrow now. Again, as with any software, if you go to File and do a save, you'll save in that software's native format, mm-hmm. which means that if you open that up again, say at a later date, all your settings that you'd previously made will be preserved. It's a great way to if you're interrupted in your editing, or you just want to keep an archive of what you've done. It's a great way to do that. You just use save or save as. However, when you want to export it to another program, you want to share it to a community, or you even want to open it directly into other applications, such as any of the Creative Kit applications, any of the 6 here that I'm showing you, it's very easy to do it directly from this export button. Just yesterday, we added the ability to share to 500 pics. We know a lot of prosumers are using it. It's a great site. You can also share to SmugMug, Flickr, Facebook, etc. When I click export, I've got your standard export dialog. And here are the file formats that we can save out. Most people will either go JPEG, TIFF, in some cases Photoshop, but there are some others there as well.
So I actually have a question regarding the saving in the native format, because that is of interest to me, because I know, and we haven't talked about it yet, but I'm sure we're going to get there shortly, that Aurora HDR Pro has the ability to work in layers, to do different effects on different layers. And if you save in the native format, and then choose to reopen it into Aurora HDR Pro, are the layers preserved and you can go back and re-edit the layers if needed?
Yeah, you've hit upon one of the key features of the program, being the layer and blend modes and brush modes. And yeah, the layers are definitely preserved when you reopen again a native file format. Let me show you how the layers work, if you don't mind.
Yeah, by all means.
So up here, I'm going to actually click the histogram button to kind of hide that histogram for now, and show you that we've got a little layers palette here. You can show and hide the layers using that button. The original image is right here. It's as you can see, it's at 100% opacity, and so we're just going to leave that one alone. I'm going to click the plus sign to create a second layer, and I'm going to call this let's say foreground. And when I have the foreground here, I'm now able to either brush in effects, or I'm able to place an effect anywhere in the image. I just happen to know that I want a little bit more detail in the foreground here. So what I can do is I can hit the brush tool, and I immediately have a large brush on the screen, whose opacity is set at 50%. Right now, the softness is at 100. As I move that less, you can see that inner orange ring, making it a little bit harder edge. So this would be just a straight-on hard brush. But if I soften it up this way, it's really a neat effect. So let me go ahead and just sort of brush in. And what I'm doing in graphic arts parlance, and I'm using some keyboard commands to kind of resize the brush here while I'm editing. This is called masking. Okay, so the masking, you can see up here in the thumbnail, you see a little bit of masking going on, but I can actually show the mask that I just drew right here. So there's that.
And that's the little eye icon over in the upper left, right?
Exactly right. So I'm going to increase that size again.
Just out of curiosity, you referenced using the keyboard shortcuts to change the size of the brush. Are those similar to what users might be familiar with in Lightroom or Photoshop for changing?
The right and left bracket.
Excellent.
So that's, we don't want to make. And so I can also erase, so you can see I've got a little bit of overspray here. So I can also, into the water. So I can kind of erase that. And the idea is to be able to, now that we have our mask, the idea is now to be able to do a more detailed look on the foreground in this case. So I'm going to add a little bit of the HDR look just to the places that I masked. You can see it kind of coming in there. I'll pop into the details to make it a little bit more crunchy. And as I turn this layer on and off using this orange button, you can see the difference. You can see there's the, here, let me zoom in a little bit.
Now, what you did, just to clarify for people, what you did there is that you basically made the layer and then you painted in the mask before you made any changes. Is that correct?
Correct. That's the way I did it in this case.
Mm-hmm. But could you do it the reverse way, basically make the layer, apply all the changes you want, and then only paint them in a certain area?
Yes, yeah, it's however your workflow is. So that's easy enough to do. Let's say, for example, I want to do something in the sky. So now I'm gonna click the plus sign again. I'll call this particular layer I'm working on sky, and let's say I want to kind of darken that down a little bit. So what I could do is I could come in here and maybe darken the highlights a little bit, and you can see it's affecting the entire image. You can see the entire image getting dark. So there's where we started, and there's where I am kind of dropping that down a little bit. And now I come in with the brush And again, let me use the keyboard commands. And so now I'm kind of just brushing that dark part into the sky area. So I've kind of separated my foreground and background. Again, there's the beginning based on the middle exposure, as you pointed out earlier, and that's where we are now.
Nice.
Okay? Now, I mentioned showing you the gradient tool earlier. I'm actually going to shut off the sky and foreground, and I'm going to come over here and I'm going to pick my gradient tool. That's this icon right here. Okay, so when I pick my gradient tool, I can of course move it up and down. I can stretch
and
it.
So with that gradient tool, which is different from the top and bottom lighting panel, with that one you are dragging on the screen to move it.
Yeah, you are dragging on the screen. So let me say I want to darken sort of the upper 2/3 of the image. I might go ahead and just apply that. Let me show you that mask here real quick. So you can see that up in the sky, and I can and so we'll just kind of drop that down, and then when I apply the when I apply the gradient, you'll see that pop in there.
So again, just to clarify, both for myself and for viewers and listeners, the difference between the top and bottom lighting panel, which uses a gradient type of interface to apply a change to the image, and this gradient you're using, is that this is one that is used on an individual layer. Am I correct in that?
Yeah, it's used on an individual layer, and it's using more masking technology, right? So I can go in here with a brush now, and I can erase part of that, or I can rotate, modify it. The top and bottom lighting, I like to explain it as being a little bit more algorithmic, right? So one is sort of the pixel pushing brush and mask method. Top and bottom lighting, I think, is a little bit more photographic and algorithmic from that side. So that's a nice nuance to point out.
Cool. Well, I'm glad you pointed that out, because I've only had just a little bit of time to start playing with this. I like what I see so far, but I stumbled upon that gradient tool that you just demoed, and I really wasn't quite sure what was going on. So I'm glad that you've clarified that for me. Nice.
And let me show you one last thing with the layers that I think is worth noting. So right now I've got 3 layers. I got the original image, I've got the foreground a little crunchier, I've got the sky a little darker because of that gradient mask. I'm going to do something clever here. I'm going to go back to the original image, and I'm going to hit a layer again, right? And I'm going to call this texture. And this hopefully will blow your mind if you haven't seen it before. So with each layer, I can actually specify, and I'm right mouse clicking to pull up what we call a context sensitive menu. So each layer can have its own blend mode. So your Photoshop guys will love that. Yeah. Here's where the real magic happens. Your source image for that layer can be either a custom texture, the original tone mapped image, or any of the frames in the exposure series. So let's say, for example, you want kind of you got a nice natural result, but you kind of want to stylize it a little bit. You can come over here to this custom texture, and it'll bring up an open dialog. And I'm going to go into some textures here that were created by Ellen Anon. She's a well-known photographer as well. And so what'll happen is that texture will come in at 100%. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm simply going to, I'm on the texture layer, simply going to dial down that opacity and kind of build it into, so you can see the background image. Now, the other way I could do it is to choose a blend mode. So if I do an overlay, and then the opacity slider, I can kind of create an entirely different effect here. Now that may or may not be, again, everything is seasoned to taste. That may or may not be, where you wanted to head with this image. But the point is that we hope that people will truly experiment with Aurora and develop their own looks. Let's say I like this entire look. I'm going to go in and call this a preset here. Let's go over here, and then I can name a preset.
Now, when you have multiple layers there on this image and you're saving a preset, is it saving the layer action as well?
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm.
And so if you're referencing an external file, such as a texture, it's saving that texture as part of the preset?
It's been embedded into the image at that point. It's not a reference link out to the data file.
Okay, all right. So now it's basically been embedded into the preset then, right? So you can use it on other files without having that original texture file in the same location out on your hard drive?
Exactly.
Oh, that's very, very cool.
Yeah, nice.
And I'm assuming that you could use the masking tools to mask the texture out of areas where you felt it was a little bit too noticeable or too strong.
I've seen that in images where there's a strong central subject, where you want kind of an HDR looking background, kind of a dramatic background, but you might have, either a car or a person or somebody that you want a softer look to.
Cool. Excellent.
So let me run through one more image for you guys, and we'll take it from there. I'm going to try to do something here that's a little bit different. So this is kind of an interior. This is kind of an interior shot that Trey did in Paris, and it's kind of an interesting shot here. Let's see how this. I'm not exactly sure how he did this, but you notice that I selected ghost reduction because I can see people in the image, right? Mm-hmm. So what I'm doing is I'm able to look at some which one of the exposures and specify which one of those exposures I want as the reference image. So I'm going to come in here, and
so all of these images that we've been seeing you work with, these are all Trey's images here.
The last one of the lake with the mountains in the background, I believe that was shot by a fellow named Dima Sitnik. He's one of the co-founders of MechFun.
Right.
So, wow, look at the colors in this thing. I love it. So this is our original image, that's tone map. There's one of the images. So I think that, from here, I might actually go into one of the presets here. And rather than take it realistic, maybe I'll see what some of Trey's presets will look like. Again, I'm a huge fan of this black truffle salt preset. And
yeah, he has some really interesting names for his presets.
Yeah, exactly. So we've got his preset in here. I'm actually loving this. Now look at the controls on the right hand side. He's got, of the 13 controls, I think he's using 9 of them. So if we want to mess with the tone curve, we can certainly do that. Maybe we want to bring some of the darker tones a little bit lighter there. I'm just basically doing this to show folks watching or listening that we do have a full featured tone curve in the program. But let's take a look at these things side by side again. And one of the cool things I love about our side-by-side view is that you can also zoom right in to a particular location. So you're seeing those locations again side by side. Yeah, and it's kind of fun to zoom around. And again, if you want to see particular parts of your image in greater detail, we've again got the zoom levels and the quick you've got the side by side, which we're seeing now, but you've also got the view where there's a split view. Mm-hmm. And with the split view, a lot of people love this because you can neatly slide the demarcation line to the left or to the right and see more of your image. Again, we'll unclick that. We'll zoom back out to full screen. Actually, speaking of full screen, there's an F key that will literally take you full screen. Oh, so you can really look at your image in its full and glorious detail, and that'll remove all your menu bars and the palettes and everything. And again, pressing F again will take you back to your fit to screen mode.
Yeah, that's nice. So it's using existing conventions that are present in Photoshop, Lightroom, and stuff like that. Very nice, very nice.
Well, so in the course of our time here, we've talked about the user interface and all the various tools that are available to you, kind of under the hood. We've shown you some of the 60 or 70 presets we ship with the product. These are one-click presets that you can then go in and adjust to suit your taste. We've talked about exporting. We've talked about sharing. We've shown you the layers and masking and brushing and gradients capabilities. We've shown you the comparisons and the histogram. And I hope you, Seán, and your listeners and viewers are getting the sense that we really poured our hearts and souls into this thing. We think it's a start to finish tool, and we think it'll serve both people who have never tried HDR before really well as people who perhaps are very seasoned with HDR. I can't tell you that a lot of the seasoned photographers, the pro photographers in the HDR space, are currently evaluating this thing, running a lot of their previous brackets through it, shooting new shots, and I hope that I know you've got the product, but I hope that your listeners and viewers will give it a try. We have free trials available at aurorahdr.com.
So that's pretty cool, Kevin. Thanks for sharing that. So regarding the demo, I was poking around the MechFun site, the Aurora HDR site, and the demo is not a time-limited demo. It's kind of open-ended in terms of time. It just you're not able to export the images or share it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. And when you're running as a plugin, you can certainly try it out within Photoshop, Lightroom, or Aperture, but you won't be able to save it back to the host application.
Okay.
And that's a way to just try it on your own images.
Yeah.
We want you to have the full experience of using the tools and getting the results. But on the other hand, we'd like to also take advantage of some of the special offers and that kind of stuff we have.
Right. And then, the other thing that I wanted to just sort of clarify, again, for myself as well as for viewers and listeners, because I know that if I have the question, probably some other people do too. Oh, sure. We mentioned that you can save the file in the kind of the native Aurora HDR format, and your layers and all your settings are preserved. Right. You can then open it back up and revisit it. But I'm guessing that the way that plugin architecture works is that aspect is really only available if you're working kind of with the standalone application and not as a plugin from Lightroom or Photoshop. Yeah,
we're not able to save in our native format when we're running within those host applications, as you mentioned.
So with those, if you're running it as a plugin, it's after you're done in Aurora HDR, it's just going to return it back to Lightroom or Photoshop or Aperture or Photos or whatever application's hosting.
Yeah, and just a little point of clarification. Even if you're using layers within Aurora, when you push it back to Photoshop or Lightroom or Aperture, it is flattening the file as well.
Of course.
So that's clear.
But what you could do in that instance, if you decided you wanted to sort of quote unquote re-edit it, you could save a preset of what you've done.
Yeah.
And then it returns it back to Lightroom or Photoshop. And if you decide, well, I really want to do something different with this, but I want to pick it up where I left off, you could bring the source brackets back into Aurora, activate your preset that you'd save from that session.
I hadn't thought about that, but yeah, that seems like that would work too.
Yes, nice. So that's kind of a little workaround way that you could get back to sort of where you had left off.
Yeah, right. So, fantastic.
There you go. Cool. So what is the pricing structure on this, and what is the difference between Aurora HDR and Aurora HDR Pro?
Okay, yeah, great. So you point out a good point, good reminder, that we sell Aurora HDR on the Mac App Store, and the normal price is $49.99. I think we're still in an intro special phase right now where you can pick up the standard version, again, on the Mac App Store for $39.99. Okay. So on the Pro side, the price is $99.99. That's available on Trey's website at stuckincustoms.com. or the MechFun website at aurorahdr.com. Now, the differences between the two is you're obviously going to be able to run as a plugin, again, in those host applications. We've included the RAW converter in the Pro version because, you're running, you're going to want to run as standalone and convert those RAW files. There's other bells and whistles. You've got additional layers that you can pull in. There's a couple of additional tools and controls that are present in the Pro version that aren't. There's a full chart of the differences between the products at aurorahdr.com.
Cool. And so again, just a clarification for myself, the normal version, Aurora HDR, which you can get through the Mac App Store, are you able to use RAW files with that, or just JPEG?
No, you're not. Currently, it's JPEGs and TIFFs and those sorts of things.
Okay, I see.
There is a clear upgrade path between. Mm-hmm. So if you decide to kind of go in on the Mac App Store, try it out on some images, fall in love with it, but you find yourself wanting to use it within a Pro workflow, or again, if you decide to twist that dial in your camera and start to shoot RAWs, then you'll need the Pro version. There's a clear upgrade path for that.
Okay, cool, great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to stop by and show us that. I know that I certainly picked up a lot of stuff that I wasn't aware of as a new user of the program. I'm looking forward to diving in a little bit deeper and processing some more of my Iceland images, since I
nice. I want to see some Aurora Borealis images done with Aurora.
I do have some Aurora images I can run through there, and I will. And I've actually been revisiting a lot of my Iceland images recently because I have a workshop coming up in March on winter landscape auroras. Okay, so so I'm kind of like deep in my Iceland image catalog now. So I'm looking forward to playing with that and seeing what I can discover. Yeah. And so the website where people can find out about MechFun is mechfun.com.
If you want to find out about our entire product line, you can go to mechfun.com. That's MACPHUN.com. We knew Aurora was going to be special, so we created a unique website for that called aurorahdr.com. I'll also point out that, you mentioned that you're kind of a new user to the software. It's only been out for less than 2 weeks, so everybody's a new user. And to that end, we've devoted a lot of time and energy to producing educational resources, how to use the product. There's a really nice get started, quick start guide. We've written in an era where there's no manuals anymore, we've actually written a PDF manual that you can download from the site. Trey, of course, has done a great job with some inspirational videos, and he's even got an hour-long HDR tutorial on Aurora alone. That's a fabulous watch. And then, we're blogging about it, socializing. There's an Aurora HDR Facebook group. A lot of different ways to get engaged with the software, and we hope that your viewers and listeners will check it out.
Cool. Well, excellent. And in terms of the demo version, that was my first experience with it. Was using the demo version, and it's a great way to check it out. It's fully functional, with the exception of you can't save the images, but you can definitely run your images through and get a good sense of it. So that's a good way to check it out. I would highly recommend that to people.
Fantastic. Yeah, thanks. Cool. I appreciate the time, Seán. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for stopping by. Well, that's it for this episode. Thank you for stopping by and joining us. So remember, you can always tune in to TheFIX as an audio podcast on iTunes, or you can watch the video version as well as have access to a downloadable audio version at the website, which is thisweekinphoto.com/TheFIX. And I'm Seán Duggan. Thanks very much for watching. We'll see you next time on TheFIX.